So Chief, the next item up is a presentation by Chief Dennis Kohlmeyer on a proposed event schedule augmentation. I don't know how you really want to describe it.
Yeah, so the basic discussion is regarding public events and the permitting process. Part of that discussion involves the fees associated with it. So before I get into the PowerPoint itself, I just wanted to kind of recap our current permitting process and how we approach public events. There's a flat $50 processing fee for any type of public event. But then there's an additional fee based on the size of the event, the projected attendance. So as the screen here is enhanced, I think give me a second here. This section down here on the screen is what I'm referring to, where the size of the event incurs additional cost for the person hosting the event. One of the concerns that I wanted to bring to discussion is that approach doesn't necessarily reflect the resources that are required for a public event. If I put it in the context of, if I'm going to schedule a marathon that covers 26.2 miles and only have 50 people run, it's still a large number of resources as if I had 400, 500, 1,000, 5,000 people run. So it doesn't necessarily reflect the resources that are allocated to an event. It just kind of approaches it from a recognition that larger events may require additional resources. So I just wanted to kind of cover that prior to getting into the PowerPoint. In reference to the PowerPoint, I took it to heart when you said a few slides with few words. There's only 3 slides, so there's not a lot of verbiage. So before we got into the discussion on how the town would like to approach addressing the charges or fees that are associated with public events, I wanted to put it in context of how other towns are approaching it in Monroe County. So I did a survey of the other police departments in Monroe County and how they approach events. So as the graphic here identifies, every other town, including the Sheriff's Department, covers the towns that don't have their own police department, do charge for law enforcement resources that are assigned to events. There is some variation, though, on the type of organizations and events that they have fees for. The basic concepts are that there's differentiation between the types of organizations or the types of events. So you have local government entities. Those could be fire departments, they could be school districts, they could be towns and villages from the Sheriff's Department's point of view, where they wouldn't charge for providing services to those groups. There's private businesses. Those would be for-profit organizations that are conducting events that would potentially require resources to assist them with the safety perspectives that associate with those. And then there's non-for-profit designated agencies that may be doing it as fundraisers or part of community service events or other types of gatherings. And then another point of differentiation would be the type of event itself may dictate the resources that are associated with it. So that could be road races, marathons, 5Ks, things like that. It could be festivals or large gatherings. Or it could be parades that we've seen in town, such as the Memorial Day Parade, the Festival of Lights, Christmas Parade, or the Fireman's Parade. When we talk about the resources associated with these types of events, I just want to put it in a little bit of context that I think historically we looked at that from a traffic control point of view only, and that is definitely a large portion of it. We talk about traffic control from a safety perspective, but we've also seen the need to assign resources to large gatherings from a intentional actor point of view. You look at what happened in Wisconsin at their Christmas parade, where somebody intentionally drove into the crowd to inflict damage. When we've seen other gatherings of people that have been targeted by violence, those are things that we now assign resources to those events to have an armed officer present in case there are those kinds of bad actors or intentional acts of violence that are committed. So this isn't just a conversation about road closure and controlling access to events. It's also about having resources on site that can intervene should there be some sort of intentional act of violence that's being committed with the gathering. So there's typically two ways that people target those kinds of events. One is either by creating events that draw in the victims that they're going to target, which we obviously saw on Christmas Eve in town, or there's people who have known pre-planned events that they use as their planning event for their targeted violence. So if that makes sense on the differentiation and some of the contents we're applying the conversation to. I bring back the list of events that we've typically had in town. This is based off the Special Police conversation we had for the events that they've assisted with. So the conversation here is associated with both traffic control and potentially with other resources being assigned from a safety perspective, which we've done for some of these events in the past. So the basic conversation here that we've added to is the type of agency requesting it. The list, so you have the event name, then you have the agency requesting it, the detail information, and what I did is I went through and I projected the police department resources that would be potentially required to staff those events from a safety perspective. So there's an individual event cost based on an officer overtime rate, and then there's a total at the bottom that estimates an annual cost for law enforcement resources to staff those events annually. So it really opens up the conversation to should there be some sort of differentiation on which types of organizations or which type of events we charge for the cost of the resources that are assigned to protect those events so that they can happen smoothly. And so I open the floor to any questions or comments you may have regarding that.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, and Chief, the page of the special event permit application, you know, I've seen this page before and it never resonated to me that in the bottom right, the metric of the attendees as being the driving force behind increased fees. The way you explained it using the marathon that covers 26 miles but has 10 runners, still needs a lot of resources versus, you know, whatever. The nice thing about that metric is it's a pretty easy one, it's pretty tangible, right? As you move into this discussion and you know, what to charge up front or, you know, differentiating the different activities, it becomes interesting.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I didn't go through and try to project based on the type of organization is I wanted to have the conversation first on seeing what the board's intention would be before that kind of number was put together, because it would require going to some of these organizations and trying to determine whether they are for-profit or not-for-profit, or there's a differentiation between types of local government, whether it's a school district. There's some conversation with the fire department on the surface. It seems like a local government, but some of those events may be associated with the association, not the actual district itself. So I think there's still some nuances to some of those conversations that probably should be discussed at this level before we reach out to organizations.
Well, the other thing that the chart that you showed, the activity chart, you've given a lot of thought, put a lot of time into trying to determine exactly what resources you would need for that event, which has nothing really to do with the number of attendees, as you stated earlier. So I don't think we can look at that flat fee of what it would be to hold that event. It certainly is going to be something that you would evaluate and know what resources are needed for that organization to hold the event. I think one of the things we do need to decide as a board is, are there organizations that we will not charge, and how do we make that decision?
Yeah, I think that would be a difficult decision. To use Tom's phrase earlier, is this fair?
Well, the other
That's,
thing,
that's what I question,
No,
is
the
the
other
fairness. If we're gonna implement something, in my opinion, it should be across the board.
and I would add that I do serve on a board, I've served on that board for a very long time, of a not-for-profit, and we have a large event. Actually, it's coming up next Saturday, and it's the Pink Ribbon Run and Walk at Genesee Valley Park. And we do pay for the resources
Right.
that are required for us to hold that event.
And some of that, I think, oh, go ahead.
So as part of this permit application, using this metrics, would your fee be listed on this permit application? So you would have to determine based upon the event itself as to what that charge would be, correct?
Yeah, so if I go back to the current applications, so those at home can see it.
Right.
There's a process here, give me a second to get it pulled back up. So on the back page of this permit process, the permit has to get approved. So it goes through these different departments currently to be assessed for any concerns we may have with the event or the proposed event that's scheduled. I think the logical way that this may go is that the person submits the application as we currently do, and as part of the approval process, we assess the resources that we require, and then we provide them with the cost of those resources so that they can make the decision as to whether the event is viable or not for them to continue the process.
Yeah, you know, it's, and it just, and John, I really agree with you on that, but we're talking about, just so we're on the same page, events that are for outside town government, like, are we on the same, like, when we have summer celebration, that's a, we're not charging the rec center for, thank you, Jen, then we are on the same page. And then, because another thing that gets kind of, I think, I don't know, I think there's a lot of ambiguity and misunderstanding by people when you say a non-for-profit. Patty, like you just said, a non-for-profit, you know, they have expenses. You have money that comes in, you have expenses that go out. And a lot of times, a non-for-profit ends up with a, you know, Paul, I'll hand it off to you, less expenses and revenue, so they have a surplus at the end of the year, and you know, whatever. So I just sometimes, and I've seen this before on other boards I've been on, like the one you're on, Patty, that some people think a non-for-profit by definition, well, we're not-for-profit, so you shouldn't charge us.
How it works,
How
unfortunately.
it works. So anyway, I digress. Jim?
I think, people are paying for the safety, so they're willing to pay the price, so that they could have a nice, fun event without worrying about anything. So I don't think, that should be a question.
Well, the shock of it is going to be that they never paid this. Some of these events were covered by the special police, which that's not what's happening now. Although, I believe that the school district, do we charge the school district when we cover some of the football games at their request?
Yeah, so some of this isn't foreign to us. We have a past practice with different types of events that happen that aren't necessarily associated with the fee application or the public event application. Currently, the school district, if they request law enforcement presence at certain events, there's a chargeback process for that, and we have that configured. When contractors are doing traffic control and they would like a police officer to direct traffic, we have a chargeback process for that. If we've done this seasonally at Wegmans for traffic control, we charge them back. So we've had this process in place for specific instances, but we've never had it as part of a structured event. And like you mentioned, a lot of that was because police to do the traffic control, which is the primary concern. Some of these events, though, we still put officers. Like, for example, a turkey trot, there's a large concentration of people in a confined space. We put an officer down there as a armed presence just to make sure that there's no bad actors or intentional acts of violence. We've done that at other public events where we know there's going to be gatherings, Jazz Fest, summer celebration, things like that. So the public safety approach has been the same, but we haven't been consistent with the approach of how we permit the process. So there's definitely the format there that you're referring to.
Okay. And Chief, and I'm glad, John, that you said in the past we had the special police do some, not all of what you'd be doing. And, without dragging that history back up, even as recently as March 24th at our town board workshop, Chief, you came in here and showed this is where we're at in the process of trying to figure out a new organizational structure that replaces the special police. And 2 out of the 3 options are paid. So where you have that same chart that you have up there as a point of reference for how much it would cost police overtime, you could bring up the chart from March 24th to show what that would cost us if we go with the option of a paid, the successor organization to the special police, either paid as peace officers or paid as non-peace officers. So I almost look at this as that this is a mutually exclusive, agnostic approach. Whether the resources we're going to deploy in the future, if we go to this, is our Webster Police Department, or it's an organization that we're still trying to vet. If it's a paid organization, we either got to increase the budget by that much money that used to be a free resource by the volunteer special police, with no recouping of that increased budget expense. Or we look at this and say, well, here's a revenue stream, fair revenue stream, and I think, as Chief showed, one that really the town of Webster is kind of the last of the municipalities not charging. There's a feeling potentially out there, and my wife runs a lot of events, and the turkey trot's awesome, right? The turkey trot is fantastic. Yellow Jacket Racing, non-for-profit or not, I don't know. That's a big revenue producer. So how will they have a culture shock or a sticker shock if we do this and all of a sudden the organizers of that event find out that the number of miles covered and the resources, whether the police or the new organization that we're still trying to vet, if they're paid, would it be the kind of sticker shock that all of a sudden chases them away from doing that in Webster? I'd be surprised if it did. Personally.
Well, I look at the projected possible cost of that, and I can't imagine it would,
No.
given
Right.
the expected revenue of the event itself.
Patty, I think they'd be like, we'd be surprised it took this long until something like this came
Well,
up.
it's exactly, the other towns have been doing this for quite a while, and while we certainly want to host all these wonderful events, we don't want to be the town that's hosting it because we're not charging, but our residents don't even pay for it through their taxes.
And that's exactly what it is. It's a workshop, so camera's not on it, there is no microphone, but thank you. Chief, board, any other comments, questions here? Thanks.